Thank you, Kevin. That was a very kind introduction. Um, he's right though. I appreciate being what I would consider kind of home. I was on the mayor board for like a dozen years, and I served as superintendent at a rural school, New Haven. I was an ag teacher originally, and I'm very pleased to now be in this position. And for those who may not know, we've been joined by Commissioner Carla Esslinger, and yes, thank you. And she has a rural background as well, having been West Plains, Ludi. So she's familiar with rural education and the challenges involved. I'm very grateful that she serves as commissioner and that she's joining us here today. So without further ado, I do bring an update on financial and governance issues that have been on the radar lately. I'm curious in the crowd today, how many here are school board members? Great. Thank you for coming out. Board members, we appreciate your service, and I appreciate very much, having been a superintendent, your willingness to give up a couple of work days to come down and spend your time talking about schools and kids and how we can help them. And superintendents in the room, great. I'm glad you're here as well. Some of this information will be familiar to the superintendents who are at the summer conference, the DESE summer conference, and some will be new, but we'll try to go through it in a way that provides enough explanation, enough detail, but also makes use of our time well. We'll look at a update quickly on the federal shutdown. I have an update on the state budget and revenue, a quick review of fiscal year 25, that is the 24-25 school year, followed by an update for the current fiscal year. We'll talk about school finance for the current year, fiscal year 26. We'll talk about the DESE budget request for fiscal year 27. That'll be the 26-27 school year. And then some comments on the implications of Senate Bill 68, which passed during the 2025 session, and also about a little bit about Senate Bill 3, which passed during the, I think the correct term is the extraordinary session that took place in August. And then just a couple of general reminders. First, update on the federal shutdown. If you've been reading the news at all, you'll know that there seems to really be no end in sight. I hadn't checked the news this morning, so I'm not aware of any progress being made. It seems like there is a stalemate, and the votes are the same each time they bring the bills up. The choices that are involved going forward are, if they go ahead and reopen the government, it will likely be with a continuing resolution. And that means essentially things continue on as they are, and that would not necessarily be a bad thing. The other option down the road is that they would pass actually a new budget, and the new budget, of course, would contain changes, some of which would affect education. As far as at the state level and the DESE level, our personnel actually were prepared for the shutdown, and they made arrangements to draw funding as available. And we've also been in contact with the federal levels about what funding streams are still available. At this time, we are able to continue operations for all programs as usual and expect to be able to through November and into December. There are a few programs that we are not able to access funds from, and those are disability determinations, adult education, or the Perkins Grant. However, we are able to still draw funds from the other federal sources, school food and nutrition, the title programs, and related programs. So at this time, we are closely monitoring the situation, and we will continue to update for the foreseeable future. Should things change, we will provide updates in the administrative memos that go out to schools. When you get into DESE, you start talking in terminology and shorthand. And so just a quick note, when I refer to fiscal year 25, that is the 24-25 school year. Fiscal year 26 is the 25-26 school year, and 27 is the 26-27 school year next year. So when I make reference to those shorthand terminology pieces, you'll know what we're talking about. About the state budget and the revenue update. For fiscal year 25, the year that just concluded, we were about as flat as really as possible. The increase in net general revenue was a total of 0.01%, which is $1.83 million. There were some notes about we earned interest, mostly based on the federal COVID funds that were still left. And total revenue did exceed consensus revenue by about $81 million. But overall, revenues did flatten up and have continued. For 26, the consensus estimate was for a 1.6% increase. And what we do is we watch the daily, monthly, and to-date totals as they come in. And so if you compare collections as of October 21st to this date in fiscal year 25, individual income taxes actually are up 4.64%. Sales taxes are up 4.6%. Areas of concern, the corporate income taxes being down over 25% year to date is an indication that we are seeing a tightening of the economy and a tightening of the state budget. Refunds actually work the other way. The state has sent out less in refunds to date than in the prior years. That's actually a net add. Overall, to date, the net general revenue is at a level of plus 2.21%. I would note, though, that if you've been watching since July, we're only a quarter of the way through the fiscal year. And since July, it's varied between minus 2% and plus 2% generally. It seems to maybe be landing more on the positive side of the ledger at the moment, but I think the real turning point will be shown after we get past the first year and into the second half of fiscal year 26. School finance for fiscal year 26. Good news, the fiscal year 26 state adequacy target is 7,145, right on schedule. And for those who recall, we have had an increase in the SAT over the last 2 years. It's the first time the SAT had recalced in some time. Last year, we phased in the first half of the SAT increase, which is how the process works. And the SAT was 6,760. There was a shortage of funding at the end of last year, and so we ended up paying just under $67.50, and that was due largely to shortfalls in lottery and gaming. I would note that the budget for the formula this year is actually an increase of $497 million and change over last year, and that is a level that was set for full funding of the formula. And we appreciate very much that Governor Kehoe did sign that budget. That was not in his original recommendation, but he did accept it and sign it. And so far, we're planning to hopefully pay out the full $71.45 over the course of the year. This budget does also acknowledge that lottery and gaming revenues have been falling short in recent years, and the budget includes lower projections from those sources, but it fills that gap with general revenue. So the result is that a shortfall due to lottery and gaming. I had a note that it may be less likely than in prior years. Actually, lottery and gaming are running a little low this year already, so there may be a shortfall, but due to filling the gap with general revenue, the shortfall is hopefully not going to be as significant. About the foundation formula and the classroom trust fund. What we do is we start the fiscal year by paying at a level that is less than the full state adequacy target. And the reason we do that is that we want to make sure we can fund schools in a predictable manner throughout the school year. And then hopefully as the year goes on and as revenue comes in, increase the SAT up until we're at the end of the year, you're made whole with the full payment. That would be the goal and the projection at this time. Right now, payments are being based on an SAT of 6,900. And as revenues solidify in the coming months, we would hope to move that up more towards the 7145. For those who in the room may be as seasoned as I, you may recall the days when there were shortfalls, and Jeff Neal was smiling at me. So thanks, Jeff. And there were occasionally withholds some years back, and we want to get to a situation where we don't get to the spring and have to start reducing payments or even minimize payments. About Classroom Trust Fund, in case there's some new superintendents in the room, the Classroom Trust Fund is the portion of the foundation formula that is attributed to lottery and gaming dollars. And why that is significant is because if the dollars are attributed to have come from lottery and gaming, they essentially have more flexibility. You can place your Classroom Trust Fund dollars in any of the 4 funds. And that's a very useful tool depending on what you need to accomplish at the local level. But the caution there is, remember, Classroom Trust Fund is a portion of your overall formula payment. It's not in addition to. And there have been a rare occasion over the years where that was mixed up and someone projected a higher amount than they were due to receive because they were adding the formula number with the Classroom Trust Fund. So just a reminder. Once again, I did mention the projections for Classroom Trust Fund have been lowered for this year, and that's because the lottery and gaming proceeds projections are lowered. And there will be fewer dollars that have the Classroom Trust Fund flexibility. But again, thanks to the legislature putting more general revenue in, the overall revenue for the formula should remain at a level that we hope will fund the SAT of 7145. A little more about the Classroom Trust Fund. Once again, the amount appropriated is actually less than what was appropriated in fiscal year 25, simply to reflect the loss, the fewer dollars coming in from lottery and gaming. And so the Classroom Trust Fund will work out, we hope, to a number of $576 per ADA, although the formula, we hope, will remain whole. If there's some reason that the revenues don't support the appropriated amount for Classroom Trust Fund, you can do some quick math, and the shortfall translates to about $13 per ADA for every $10 million that we're short. For frame of reference, at the end of last year, I made a reference to we paid the SAT about $10 less than the projected number is 6760. That was about $8 or $9 million that we were short. So that works out with this calculation here. As mentioned earlier, the state adequacy target for this year is 7,145. And every 2 years, the SAT is recalculated based on the expenditure for pupils in what's known as performance districts. And those are districts who have been scoring high on MSIP. And the list of formula districts changed significantly 2 years ago when MSIP 6 came in. And that list has continued to be a much shorter list than it was in prior years. And when the calculation was done to run the SAT for fiscal year 27 and 28, there's not going to be a change in the SAT. It will still be at 7,145 for the next 2 years. What did change are the thresholds for free reduced price lunch for IEP students and for limited English proficient students. And you'll notice the thresholds actually are increasing. That's a reflection of the LEAs districts that are in that performance group. What that means, though, is not necessarily a great thing for districts across the state. There will probably be fewer dollars coming in due to the thresholds. Hopefully not a great reduction, but it would not be accurate to say that with the new thresholds, they will generate additional dollars. They likely won't in most cases. One thing that will increase dollars headed towards districts is the phase-in of membership. And that means that we have traditionally paid on weighted average daily attendance for the formula, WADA. And what has been put in place due to Senate Bill 727 is a 5-year phase-in where we're going to use weighted membership to eventually equal 1/2 of the student count in the formula. It ends up being about a $200 million increased draw for the formula, increased cost to the formula. And that's because districts that are out there with perhaps an attendance rate that is not as high as they would like will probably get a little bump because part of your state formula payment will now come from membership, essentially students that are enrolled and not so heavily just based on attendance. So if you're out there and you're a very high attendance district, you may not see a lot of change. If you're out there and you have an attendance rate that is less than you would hope, you may get a little bump due to the change to phasing in weighted membership. And the reason this happened is because I think it reflects the reality that we all have to staff for the students that are on the books, not just the ones who are there at a 94% rate. And so it's probably not a bad change, and it does increase dollars overall going to schools across Missouri. So that will be phasing in for this year, 26. The weighted rate is 90% still on weighted ADA and 10% on membership. And for fiscal year 27 next year, it will move to 80/20 and continue until by 2030, we reach a 50/50 rate. Yes. That's a good point, John. John pointed out that what I stated a moment ago remains true as long as the formula stays in its current configuration and as long as the legislature appropriates full funding. If there is less than full funding appropriated, the adjustment mechanism is the SAT. Essentially, the state adequacy target gets dialed down, and that has effects on districts throughout the state. Um, Not so much on hold harmless districts, perhaps, but it does affect most districts across the state. And we did experience a little bit of that at the end of fiscal year 25. Essentially, there was not enough money at the end of the year. I mentioned we were short $8 or $9 million, and so the SAT essentially dialed down from 6760 to 6749 and change. So that's a good point, John. Thank you for the caution. Prop C. For those who may not know, Prop C is a statewide sales tax that is collected and then distributed back to schools on a weighted average daily attendance calculation. Sales tax revenues have continued to increase at a modest rate. For fiscal year 26, the legislature appropriated the same amount as in the prior year. So the funding works out to an estimate of $1,495 per WADA. If you're checking your history, you'll note that's a little less than projected in fiscal year 25. And that's because the same amount of money appropriated is being divided by a larger number of weighted average daily attendance. So the amount per weighted average daily attendance is dropping a little bit. One thing about Prop C, two things about Prop C. It is reliant on cash being available. We can only send out the cash that has come in. And if on the other side, sales tax comes in really strong, we are only able to send out the amount appropriated. Actually, at the end of a recent year, there was a little cash that was left over, and it went out immediately in the following year to help make that payment. But that's how Prop C works. Transportation funding. For the current year, we were funded at full funding by the legislature. It did require a one-time $15 million increase for the formula. And what that means for fiscal year 27 is that for 27, we need to get that one-time $15 million again, plus an additional for extra costs that'll be coming our way. We'll talk about that here in a few moments. But full funding for the transportation formula was appropriated by the legislature for the current year. Now we'll get to probably, I think, the highlight, and that is the DESE budget request for fiscal year 27. And I'm glad that Commissioner Esslinger was able to join us here for this part of the program, because we get budget instructions about what state agencies should request, what they're allowed to request for. And I'll just say the budget instructions this year were somewhat restrictive. We're all aware, I think, that the state economy is not growing as robustly as perhaps it has at one time. And we're also aware that the COVID era dollars are essentially running out. So the budget instructions were restrictive, and we actually met with budget and planning this past Monday, and Commissioner Esslinger was right there at the table, and she was there for public education in Missouri. And I'm very pleased to announce that the DESE request is for full funding of the formula, for full funding of transportation, full funding for Career Advisor, full funding for teacher baseline salary grant, and full funding for all provisions of Senate Bill 68. So Commissioner Esslinger, thank you for your leadership on that note. We appreciate it very much. It was quite a meeting, was it not? It was. Now, we're happy to have her in the room. We appreciate the hands-on leadership that is involved in making those decisions, because they are not easy. To point out a few fiscal year 27 new decision items. Again, I mentioned foundation transportation, small schools grant full funding, early child special education full funding, teacher baseline salary full funding. I want to pause a moment and talk about the Success Ready Student Assessment. You may have heard that DESE was granted an innovation waiver from the federal level. And what that means is that DESE has permission to run a pilot program for interim assessments. You know, right now we all take the MAP test at the end of the year. And this pilot program enables DESE to work on developing an interim assessment model where students would take tests at certain points throughout the year, and the feedback would be returned to the teachers right away. And then the students' scores would essentially be accumulated at the end of the year, and that could potentially serve as their MAP score. And this is a really innovative program, and we did receive the waiver. So there is a request in the budget for $2 million to take this pilot program that will be running this spring with about 200 students and to begin scaling it up. Theoretically, this could actually be a change away from the current MAP one time per year snapshot type of testing program to something that I think reflects a little better the reality. Yes. Good. Commissioner is pretty excited about that one, as am I. So I'm sure she'll have more to say about that in a few moments. But no, I think it's great, and I think the budget request, I hope it'll be put through the legislature and we can move on and try to scale that program up. About Senate Bill 68, passed during the 2025 legislative session. It was a large omnibus bill containing 30 plus provisions, many of which did pertain to education. I'll touch on a few of those, and you probably have heard these. First, there is a provision to allow schools to collect state aid for students who are under suspension or expulsion. And I think that was in response to the idea that we have to make sure that students who are continually disrupting the education environment can be taken care of in a way that is good for them and also good for every other student in the classroom. And there was almost a financial penalty for suspending students. And I think this takes that a little bit out of the picture. There's full guidance on that on the finance topics and procedures page on the DESE website. If you haven't checked that one out, I would encourage you to do so. There are things you have to do to report that to make sure it gets included in your state aid payment. There had been put in law the year before an incentive to have a 169-day calendar. But there's some question in the prior law about whether or not weather situations would cause you to not meet the 169-day calendar incentive. And that has been cleared up. And that is that weather forgiveness provisions do apply. And you're okay if you are missing days due to the appropriate weather-related causes. So what's going to happen now is DESE's assembling a list of LEAs that we believe qualify for this incentive, and we will publish that list. And I would encourage you to check that list. And if you believe you should be on it, but you are not, you'll need to contact your state supervisor in your area or call me at DESE, and we'll ask you to supply documentation that indicates why you should be on the list, and we'll work towards that end. But that list is being assembled right now. We had to wait for your data to come in, all your calendars to be corrected, and we're almost to that point. I do want to point out, if you look at the DESE guidance on the 169-day calendar provisions, it's a little bit confusing. We've tried to make it as clear as we can, but there are two 169-day calendar provisions. One is the incentive to keep a 169-day calendar. That's what I've been talking about so far. But there's also a provision where certain schools in certain areas with certain populations in their area are required to keep a 169-day calendar, or they have to go to a vote of the people to go to a 4-day week. Independence, I think, is the district that is probably best known for moving to a 4-day week, and there was some controversy about that move. But you need to read that guidance closely, because at the end of the document in the appendix, there is a list of schools. That's the list of schools that we believe are required to keep the 169-day calendar. That's not the list of schools that we think qualify for the incentive. The list of schools that we believe qualify for the incentive is yet to be published, but it should be coming out soon. So when you read that calendar document, please understand there are two 169-day calendar provisions in play. I will note, I had a question a while back that do you have to go through and receive a 1% incentive before you can receive the 2% incentive? And the answer to that is no, you do not. For fiscal years 26 and 27, the incentive for whoever qualifies will be 1% additional state aid. For 28 and beyond, the incentive will be 2% for whoever qualifies. You don't have to go through 1% and then get a 2%. Yes. What determines the state aid of that calculation? Troy, I'd have to go back and get that information for you. Yep. I don't want to speak offhand and speculate and be wrong. So if you could give me a call or shoot me an email, we'll run that through the finance department and make sure I get you the straight, clear answer on that one. Good question, though. Thank you. Senate Bill 68 also had a provision about children of school contractors or non-certified employees being allowed to attend as resident students, and that is an optional decision that your board can make about whether or not they want to participate in this provision of Senate Bill 68. It simply would allow those children to attend much in the same way that children of teachers do in many districts. There was provision that allowed school bus drivers to continue driving at 70 plus with fewer requirements to test. Currently, prior to August, bus drivers that were 70 plus had to renew the license every year, and the new requirements will put that in place at age 75 instead of 70 and move from annual to biannual. Senate Bill 3 implications. Okay, this was the stadium bill that was passed, and it's a very interesting bill. Essentially, as far as Senate Bill 3 goes, certain counties were designated as 5% counties. Certain counties were designated as 0% counties, and certain counties just remained the same. What that means is that in a 5% county, tax liability on homesteads may increase by no more than 5% or CPI per year. 0% counties, tax liability on homesteads may not increase above the initial year of 2024. The increase in assessed valuation, though, would still affect your tax rate calculations. Tax liabilities would be calculated and then a tax credit would be applied. So essentially your rollback would take place normally, but those dollars would not all be coming in. And what has to happen is the counties that were designated as 0 or 5% must place this issue of tax credits on the ballot by April of 2026. So that is again, an interesting provision. I would note, and I think you may have heard something about this during your conference, Senate Bill 3 is now being challenged in court. 2 state senators are challenging the provision of Senate Bill 3 that pertain to stadium subsidies, and there are 6 school districts, a fire protection district, and some residents that are challenging the property tax provisions in Senate Bill 3. So that is working its way through the legal process at this time, and I'm not sure what guidance we can provide. Honestly, property tax is not within DESE's purview, but I wanted to make sure this is on your radar because you probably will be seeing something about this by April of 2026. General information. This is a topic that I am not glad that we have to bring up, but there is a provision in statute that DESE each year has to determine if there is a school district somewhere that is experiencing financial stress, and we are required to identify and notify those districts as well as notify the State Board of Education. The characteristics for identifying a district as financially stressed are a negative balance in either the teachers or incidental funds, or a combined ending balance in the teachers and incidental fund less than 3%, or some measure of tax anticipation borrowing between February 1st and June 30th. And that's kind of a key calendar provision. We take this information from the ASBR, the Annual Secretary of the Board Report, which is the year-end financial document for your district. And the one that typically is brought into play would be the combined ending balance in the teachers and incidental funds of less than 3%. Now, for the last several years, we have identified no school districts as financially stressed, and I think only 1 charter school. This year, actually, we did identify 3 districts as financially stressed, and we did have to report that at the state board, and that took place this past Monday. So I bring this up because as we go into a time of tighter finances, it's going to be important for each superintendent and school board and district to carefully monitor not only your balances, but also your trajectory, and be prepared for more difficult times. We don't want anyone to be in a financially stressed position, and we're actually working on our end to do what we can to identify and provide support earlier. We actually are maintaining, it's not a list, but we're watching districts who fall between 3 and 10% in balances, and in many cases are making phone calls to those districts to talk about, hey, we've noticed that your balances are, less than 10%. Or we also look for districts whose trajectory of balances are on a decline that would indicate some measure of concern. So my encouragement here is not to scare anyone or warn anyone, simply a reminder to pay close attention to your balances. If you are deficit spending, make sure it's intentional and with a purpose. And my suggestion would be on one-time events, one-time purchases, one-time projects. It's very difficult to deficit spend on recurring expenses and then come back from that without some form of attrition or other measures. Alternative methods of instruction, AMI. I bring this up because it's my sense that this is going to receive additional scrutiny in the coming days. For those who may not know, AMI is the ability to, for example, call off school for weather, but then have students work either at home on paper and pencil projects or work online with their teachers and count that day as a school day. If you are going to participate in using AMI, you must have an approved plan. there's actually a plan out there on the DESE website that you have to fill out and complete and have us approve it before you're allowed to actually do AMI. And there were actually districts that last year failed to have an approved AMI plan, but then went ahead and had an AMI day. And that's a situation we're working through. So if you plan to use AMI, please check and make sure your AMI plan is on file and has been approved. Yes,
Yearly.
it is a yearly approval. Yes. You are limited. You are to notify parents on the day of implementation. If it's a snow day and it's the night before, I think you can notify parents the night before and that'll be okay. You cannot, for example, though, say today, Friday, the next Friday will be an AMI day. It doesn't work that way. That's not the intention of the law. You are limited to 36 hours per year of AMI. My suggestion would be to adjust your calendar for each AMI day to 6 hours instead of your probably 6 point whatever decimal number of hours. And that gives you a full 6 days of AMI available. Your total hours for the calendar for the year must still be 1,044 or greater. And AMI hours do replace that school day's worth of instruction. There's no provision that would allow you to have an AMI day, have a snow day tomorrow and make it up another day. It doesn't work that way. Also, days that are part AMI and part in person are not allowed. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here. Commissioner, if you don't want to hear this, just don't. I've been asked, okay, so what makes a good AMI day? Because I mentioned AMI days are going to be under increased scrutiny to make sure it's quality instruction. If it's going to replace a day of instruction, it should actually replace a day of instruction. So I was asked, what makes for a quality AMI day? And the answer is there's no written description of what makes a quality AMI day. You file a plan with us, but it is essentially a framework. If you're asking me personally, my answer would be, if you can go on TV tomorrow morning and explain what you're doing on an AMI day in a way that would satisfy the parents and grandparents in your district and have them say, that's a good idea. I support learning that way. Then I think you're okay. If you can't do that, you probably need to work a little more on your AMI plan. Just, that was free, not part of the conference. And, if you're glad you're here for it, great. And if that wasn't great, that's okay. This is the other provision I wanted to mention. I mentioned the two 169-day calendar provisions. First one was the incentive. This one is the one where there is a minimum school term required for certain districts. It goes into effect 7/1/26, 1,044 hours still required. 169 days are required in districts wholly or partially within charter counties, districts wholly or partially within cities of greater than 30,000 population, unless voters approve a 4-day week by a majority vote. So I bring it up mainly because you don't have to be fully in these areas. If a portion of your district happens to fall in these areas, then it should be applicable to your district. So just check and make sure that you are or are not within charter county, cities greater than 30,000, that kind of thing. Let's see. There we go. Reminder about minimum teacher salary. The minimum is $40,000 starting in fiscal year 26, current year. Master's plus 10-year experience minimums go from $46,000 to $48,000, and then there are inflationary adjustments in fiscal year 2029 and beyond, and you may use the teacher baseline salary grant to help meet these requirements. And then just some reminders and comments. All Missouri school districts, including charter schools, are required to be audited annually, and you must submit a copy of the audit report to DESE by December 31st. In addition, districts and charter schools that expend more than $750,000 of federal funds during the fiscal year must have what's called a single audit. It's simply a more comprehensive audit that pertains like mostly to federal funds. That $750,000 limit will actually go up to $1 million next year, I believe. Here's the situation. I'm sure most of you either have your audits done, you may not have them back yet, but they should be done by now probably. But those who have to have a single audit, there's an issue with the federal guidance on that single audit. It has not yet been released. And that is possibly holding up your auditors. I see some heads nodding in the crowd. I understand, and we are monitoring the situation. We're hopeful the federal guidance will be released in time for you to make a timely submission. That's happened in the past. We've had this situation occur in years before, and the guidance was always released in a time where you could still get your audit done and turned in on time. The government shutdown does throw a little bit of a curveball into that situation, and we are aware of that, and we are working on what we could possibly do within statutory requirements to let you meet the December 31st deadline, even if the federal guidance has not yet been released or is not released in a timely fashion. So we are aware of the situation. We are working on it. I don't have an answer for you today. With a little luck, they'll clear up the shutdown and we'll move right on, but we will provide guidance as soon as it is available. At this time, I would suggest you simply go ahead and get the audit completed to the point you can, and you might even go ahead and see if the board can review it, approve it in current form, and move on from there. I wanted to remind everyone that there are DESE resources that you may or may not really have a full knowledge of. We have DESE guidance on attendance reporting. There is a Missouri Financial Accounting Manual. There are school finance calculation tools, the monthly school finance memos, school finance topics and procedures page. That's a huge one. There's a transportation aid calculator. And again, there is the aforementioned 169-day school calendar provision guidance. I would encourage you to make sure you are making full use of all of these resources. I think Kevin's going to post this presentation after this conference concludes, or at least make it available to you. These links are hot, so you can take these links and get to these resources. As a superintendent, they were invaluable, especially the monthly finance memo. And if you are new to the profession, I encourage you to take advantage of it. If you're a board member, I think it may be an educational exercise to take a look at what your superintendent works with on a daily basis. My contact information is here, and I am happy for you to contact me at any time. If I don't know the answer, we have a finance staff, governance staff, and we will find the answer for you. My predecessor, Dr. Monsis, would say, if you look for more than 10 minutes on the website and you don't find it, you're wasting your time, call us. And I think that's good advice. So please feel free. You can call me, or you can contact any member of the governance and financial services team. They are all extremely knowledgeable. David Trammell is a former superintendent as well. Tammy Lehman is probably the most capable numbers person I've ever met, and we will find out what you need. Closing my part, my presentation, I do want to thank Missouri Association of Rural Education for this opportunity. School board members, thank you for your service, especially being here at this conference. Not everybody does this. It means a lot that you do, and it means a lot that you're there for your kids and your community. And superintendents and staff, thank you for the great work you do every day. I experienced it for 20 years and could not have done it without you, so thank you for that. Any questions I can answer at the moment? That's a bit of a dangerous place to go, but if there are questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
That's more of a curiosity question.
Yes.
The 69 with Senate bill.
Yes.
Charter, it goes into July 1st, 2026.
That was the calendar requirement 169 days. Yes, that's the information I have.
Okay, so districts are already a 4-day school week. They're within charter counties, that kind of stuff. Are they gonna have to put it on the ballot? Keep that approved?
I think that's an interesting question, and I don't have the answer for that one.
I mean, there's 170 people in my town, so it's not gonna affect me.
Right. Um, I know Independence has been dealing with a question of this nature, although I don't know the specifics. So I probably don't have that answer for you today if it's going to be retroactive and would require them to go back and change. But we can find that out if you'd want to chase that down. Okay. Sorry, John.
It is Kyle. Independence votes Crystal City. So it unless back court hearing case Judge Lemple comes out.
They will have to go back and put it on the ballot. Okay.
If they fall,
Okay. I will yield to Dr. Turner's experience here. He's on staff with Missouri State University and has obviously been following this closely, being the gentleman who deals with 4-day weeks quite a bit. So thank you for that. Yes.
the government
Has the government shutdown impacted background checks? I have not heard that it has, but I have also not been working with background checks since the shutdown.
here at school.
That's a good question. There are not provisions of which I'm aware right now to deal directly with that situation. I can ask our school of food and nutrition folks what might be possible. Okay, you can't get hold of it. Okay, call me. All right, we'll get you there. Yes, John.
It's more there's
Mm-hmm.
there's
John's question had to do with if a student is suspended and you could collect full attendance on that student during their suspension, but then you still provide education to the student, perhaps virtual, and for virtual students, it's a lesser rate of attendance. John, my interpretation of that, and I believe the way the statute reads, is that such students shall be counted in attendance. Now, there's another provision where districts, schools are still obligated to provide education to students who are suspended or even expelled. So my interpretation is that they would count full attendance as per the suspension statute. However, the school should still provide education to the best of its ability to those students during that time. Did that answer your question? In my understanding, this statute applies specifically to suspended students, and it would apply to students who are suspended who happen to be receiving virtual. Okay, good question. Thank you. Okay, if no further questions, then if you let me reset for a moment, if you'd want to take about a minute or two and grab a cup of coffee or something, I will reset the presentation and move into the Formula Modernization Task Force information, and I'll be right back.